Hello. 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 Yeah, I think I have my voice, but no one else has joined. So let's wait for 2 minutes. See, Rohi is joining in. Let's wait. I see Sarang's joining in as well. 1 minute. Let me admit him. Uh, admit. Yes. Good. Rahul has joined in as well. I hope people are able to hear me, right? Hi all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hello. Let's start, or let me share the screen first. Okay. I hope you can see my screen as well. So let's start from where we left off yesterday. Yesterday, just to give a quick understanding, we again started with the basic types of data. We saw there are two types of data: quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative being the measures, qualitative being the dimensions. Qualitative can be divided into nominal and ordinal. Quantitative divided as discrete and continuous. Then we also saw some examples and we understood that from time to time qualitative and quantitative are getting intermingled, or we will be deliberately intermingling them as part of the analysis that we do. And that's really going to help. When we see more examples, we'll come to know how that's going to help. Then we looked at the 5 different kinds of variables we have. We looked into control, categorical, confounding, dependent, and independent variable. Then we started looking into experiments, and we didn't have time. So let's continue from experiments. I'll quickly give you another, let's say, brief about the experiments thing. So an experiment, as we saw, is simply a research. I'm trying to do a research on something. I'm trying to see if, let's say, for 1000 times, I'm going to roll a dice. And maybe I have some assumption that, okay, if I roll the dice for 1000 times, I'm going to get an output of, let's say, 3 or 5. So the dice is going to show me 5 for 200 times. Is that really the case or no? Let's do a research and let's try to find out. If it is a proper dice and it is a fair dice, that should not be the case, that 1/5 of the time I'm getting only one value, because there are 6 distinct values. So let's say if I roll the die for 2000 or 5000 times, I should get equal number of each and every sides, right? So there should not be any bifurcation. So that kind of an exercise is otherwise known as a research. I'm doing that by means of doing some experiment. In this case, the experiment simply means that I'm rolling the die. So that's my experiment, and what I'm trying to figure out is my research. So that's the activity. The activity here is known as the experimental research. Now, in statistical terminology, what experimental research clearly means is that I'm going to manipulate the independent variables and examine the effect that this change has on the dependent variable. What I mean by that is, when I'm rolling the die, okay, let's do some changes. Let's make the room cold. Is that going to change the output? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know that. So let's see. Maybe if the room is very cold, I have my AC turned on, and maybe I'm decreasing the temperature to a great extent with the fan turned on in full speed as well. So I'm feeling a lot of cold, and then in that case my hands will shake, and the probability or the outcomes that I'm getting out of that experiment might change. So that's how I can, it's a manipulate the independent variables which I have. Sometimes I'm also going to use control variables. Example given: when I roll the die, the lights should be on. So considering all the control and independent variables, any modification of independent variable and the effect of that onto the dependent one is going to be recorded. And that is the purpose of doing an experiment, to find out what is the effect of one on the or the other. right? So let's say we're trying to find a drug for this COVID-19 problem that we have, and let's say we have 5 or 7 or 20 independent variables, where each and every variable conforms to a health related condition, or let's say a physical status of the patient and so on, or maybe something we got out of the blood test and so on. So we're going to control, or we are going to modify them. Let's say we'll add a chemical X to 20% and then see if the application of that vaccine is going to kill the virus or not, and so on and so forth. So in that way only we will come to the final vaccine, right? Which is going to have the right balance of all the independent variables, and then we can say that with this XYZ combination of the independent variables, I have finally concluded that this so and so combination of independent variables gives me a chemical which, if induced or tested on a human being, and most probably if it is proven to be successful, then I can use that combination of chemical elements as the vaccination, right? So that's the essence of doing an experimental research. So when we are doing any such kind of experimental research, one thing I would like to clearly tell you, something which we have seen yesterday as well, and you should have got the idea as well. Confounding variables play a very, very important role, although they are almost always not part of the data set. Example given, let's say when I was rolling that dice, I said that I'm going to change an independent variable, which is the temperature of the room. Maybe my hands are going to shake a bit more because of cold, and then the results of the outcome is going to change or is going to be affected. In this case, confounding variable can be one thing, that my hands are shaking because of the fact that I'm not wearing a full sleeve t-shirt. If I'm wearing already a very mota and a strong kind of a t-shirt, then it is not going to matter much in that case, because maybe I'm not feeling that much of cold. So there is always some kind of a hidden variable which is there, which are usually there in each and every experiment, where you don't have much of a control, and that is the reason why it may not be there in the data set as well, and that creates a lot of problems. Or it can create a lot of advantages. Now, please don't always analyze things basis the data which you already have. Try to think if there can be more data which covers all of such confounding cases or not, because there will almost always be some kind of confounding variables which you cannot control. If it is the case that you would have controlled all the variables in the world, you would have achieved everything within a single day, right? Why are then we having a lockdown for the last 2 months? We would have found the solution to this virus on the first day. There are a lot of variables which we cannot control, a lot of factors which we don't know how to make use of, and that's where effect of confounding variable is always there on any experiment. This is what causes a very important thing which is known as bias. Okay, we are going to look at bias in depth later on, but bias, I can tell you as of now, plain and simple English, it is going to affect the results positively or negatively. So bias is something which clearly uh, affects the results of a research, uh, positive or negative. Okay, but the problem is, in case of bias is almost always usually introduced by the presence of, as we saw, confounding variables. Yeah, so that is the reason why these are very hard to control, and they are important as well, because they cause a lot of problems. They are going to cause a lot of issues when we do this statistical analysis. But let's go back to experimentation, keeping this in mind. Now, we have two very important ways, or two very important methods by means of which we do experimental research. Okay, so there are two common methods in which we do. And before we go into that kind of an a detail, let's look into a quick example, okay, of an experimental research. Why we are looking into that example of an experimental research is because this is how we are going to frame our problem when we start collecting the data. Because statistics usually starts to come into play when you have a question, or you don't have a question, you're trying to explore, but you need some data. And then you start gathering the data, you need some kind of a methodology. You need some kind of an intuition to gather that data, irrespective of what technology you're going to use. So let's say I have a class of students. Okay, and I have a class of 100 students. Okay, maybe there are 4 sections in the class, and there are 100 students, 25 students in each section. I am a teacher, and I would like to divide the students into two groups. Okay, so I'm going to create two groups. Okay, I have students and I have 100 students. I'm going to create two groups, one group of 50 students each. Okay, I'm equally dividing the number of students into two groups, and I'm doing this randomly. I'm selecting the students randomly. This randomly word is very important, hence I'm going to mark it with stars. We're going to look into this word very carefully very soon. But let's take an example. So in this example, I am a teacher, and I'm dividing these 100 students into two groups, 50-50. I'm going to call the first group as group 1. Group 1 is where I have 50 students, and what I'm going to ask these 50 students to do is that tomorrow there is an examination. Do not do any revision. Okay, do not revise any notes. Do not revise any mathematics or anything that I've learned in the class. Tomorrow there will be a test. Okay, so you are not allowed to do any study on that. Now, how am I going to control that? My students are going to go home, right? After the class is over, after the school or college is over, they'll go home or they'll go to hostel. I don't know how they are going to behave when they are out of my sight, right? So that's where control variable comes into picture. Maybe I'm going to have some kind of restriction on them that they are not allowed to study. Okay, so I'm going to tell their parents, don't give them books. Okay, make them sit in front of the TV. If even if that is the case, you have to make them sit in front of the TV for the whole night. Okay, so they are not allowed to study. Okay, I need help from all of the teachers, or maybe even the warden and the security guards in the hostel has to help me with this that kind of an environment, that no of these 50 students are supposed to read. Okay, put them in one room if that is the case, and give them a dinner, but don't let them study at all. They are not going to do any revision. Okay, then I have group 2. Okay, I have group 2 where again I have 50 students. Okay, then I'm going to tell them, do as much revision as possible. Okay, as possible. Let's say I'm announcing this at 6 p.m. in the evening. Tomorrow 9 a.m. there is an examination. So you have limited number of hours. You don't have 24 hours or 2 days or 5 days of time to do revision. You have limited number of hours. You have to eat, you have to sleep, you have to take rest as well, or otherwise your brain is not going to function in the right way, right? So these 50 students will have enough time to study. Okay, they are going to have enough time to do as much as revision they would like to do. Okay, they are free to do whatever revision they want to do, whatever chapter they would like to revise. Now I take a test. Okay, now on the test day, which is the next day, I'm going to take a test and compare the output from both groups. Okay, I'm going to see what is the effect of doing any revision on the marks of the students. So I'm going to try and find out if on the last day, if I'm going to read 5 books just before the day of the examination, is that really going to help, or is that only a faltu time pass? Because I don't know whether there is really any effect on a student who is studying for the entire year for an exam, as opposed to another student like me who always used to study before the day of the exam. So if there is any such effect, then I'm going to note that down. So this is my experiment. This is how people conduct experiment, and this is how the statisticians are going to come to an outcome that, okay, even if you have studied for the entire year, that is what is going to mainly matter for you, other than the fact that on the night before the day of examination you have read 10 books. Okay, and you have not slept, you have not eaten anything, right? It's not going to make any difference, because for the entire year you were watching TV. So that's the kind of research that I would like to do in this case. And in this case, as you can clearly see, the control variables are many. I would like to control the situation in many different ways. My independent variable is the number of hours of revision a student is going to do, being part of group 1, which should ideally be 0. That's my control. And group 2 will be as much as possible. How many hours are there? If it is 6 p.m. and tomorrow the exam is at 10 p.m. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then the 10 hours. So they have 16 hours. 16 hours may 6 hours or 7 hours they are going to sleep. So they have 9 hours. For eating, they'll need at least half an hour to 1 hour, along with break and rests and all those things, right? So 7 plus 1, 8 hours is gone. They have 16 hours. So they have only 8 hours to revise. So what is the effect of that last day 8 hours of revision on the test marks? So this is what is known as a study, an experimental research. Now we have touched a lot of items over here, a lot of things that we have talked about. They will be clear if I'm going to take some kind of research, if I'm going to do the definitions, which I'm going to do in some very simple way within some time only. Okay, I'm sure we are going to have time today only to look into these. Okay, now when I am doing this kind of an experiment, there is one possibility that this is an experiment. So I can say above is an example of experimental research, which I'm also going to call as AKA, or also called as, or also known as experimental research or observational study. I am actually studying things. I'm not changing anything. I'm studying with some control, some level of control. Maybe out of that group one, some student is very smart and they'll have some way or the other to find out a hack that nobody can stop them from studying, and they are going to study, and they would like to prove in front of their friends that, see, my tutor asked me not to study. I did not study at all. I have not done any study, but still, you see, I've got a lot of marks. I've really got very good marks. So see how intelligent I am. So there will be cases where you are going to miss the control. So you really don't have any control in this case. You can't put all those 50 students in a single room and log them, right? Otherwise, their parents are going to kill you. They're going to go to the police, right? So you assume that there is some kind of control you're going to put, but ultimately you may not have any control. In that case, and that's the exact reason why many or almost all of the observational studies or experimental research are put into the category of observational study, because you are only observing. We're expecting students in group 1 not to study. We're expecting group 2 to study at least for 8 hours, do as much as possible, then come on the next day, which is the test day, the D day, and you give the examination. I'm going to compare your marks, right? Now, there is one more type of research which is known as non-experimental study. Okay, this is sometimes used. Okay, this is not always used, but in some cases, in let's say machine learning, we are going to use. So this is like sometimes used. So in statistical inference or in regular statistics, this might be used, but when it comes to data science, it is not much used. But I would just like to tell you what it is. So example given, this is where a researcher or any statistician does not manipulate the independent variable. It is not independent to do so. The researcher may want to change it. He or she may have the probability to change it. They may have the control to change it. They may have the control to control the independent variables, but they don't want to do that. So they don't want to play around with an experiment. Okay, they want to do an observation in a non-experimental way. Example given, it is okay. I mean, I would like to request group 1 students not to study. So I'm not putting any security guard. I'm not informing their parents. So I'm not really trying to enforce anything. Maybe a better example is, being a researcher, maybe I'm interested in looking at the effect of illegal recreational drugs, which we used to take when we were there in college. I've seen many of my friends doing that. In this case, that drug I'm going to consider that drug as an independent variable. So that recreational drug is going to be my, let's say, independent variable. Okay, and then I would like to see the effect on certain types of behavior. Okay, so I'm going to see the behavioral effect of that drug. Okay, so this is where I am going to call this a non-experimental study. Why is this the case? Because I'm really not going to, if I can stop you from taking the drug. I can put you in a rehabilitation room for 1 day, and I can stop you from taking that drug. I can put you into a rehabilitation home for a week. But I'm not going to do that. Maybe I can, but I may not want to do that in this case. And we just like to experiment on you by not doing any experiment. Right? So this is like a very confusing kind of thing, where sometimes statisticians do to avoid the effect of any control going wrong. Example, if I'm putting some controls and that goes wrong, then the effects might be something which I'm not be able to ascertain or explain. So that's why I don't want to put any control. Let what be is be, and then I'm simply going to observe and see what is the effect. Right? So as you can see, this is kind of a very coagulated kind of a concept, but it's somehow used. Okay. Now, this brings us to a very important aspect of the experiments, where I would like to give you some points, right? And some points will be given to you, which are sometimes used while doing the experiments. While doing the experiments, we will come across some points. Okay. First point is known as placebo. I'm going to explain each and every of these points. Don't worry. First point is called placebo. Second point related to placebo will be second point, and the third point blind experiments. And then I'm going to have double blind experiments. Okay. So what this means is placebo is merely a lie. Okay. I'm going to act like a big liar, and I'm going to give you a lie, a blatant lie, and then I'm going to see what is the effect of that lie. Okay, let's take an example. This is a very famous study which was done in one of the universities in the US. I don't remember the name. It was also done once in the European region as well. They could not conclude anything from there, but it was done. So what they did is, let's say I'm having some fever tonight. Now, you know the situation all around, people are worried about, let's say, the COVID-19 effect, and I'm feeling a bit feverish now, then that's going to put everyone in my house into tension, right? So instead of, let's say, in my house, I don't have any Calpol or any Crocin or any such kind of paracetamol-based tablets. Okay, I don't have any such kind of tablets. Instead, what I do, I take a tablet which is, let's say, Norflux TZ. So Norflux is usually which we take for any problems with the stomach or with the digestion problem. Okay, so I take a Norflux TZ and I give it to the patient. So let's say my wife takes that pill, and she's good to give me that pill, stating, okay, this is a paracetamol tablet. Go ahead and eat it. So I'm supremely confident that the tablet that I'm ingesting or inserting into my mouth, then I'm going to have some water as well. So that tablet is actually a paracetamol, and it is going to help me reduce the effect of the fever which I have. And then I take that tablet. In that experiment which we had done, which was done in the US university, we saw that there are many cases where people are emotionally made to believe that they are taking a tablet related to paracetamol, even if they are not. And then the effect of that high temperature on the body is reduced. So they have lost the effect of fever because they assumed that they took a pill which has some kind of, it's a paracetamol in them, although they took a pill which has absolutely nothing to do with the paracetamol. So this is not the case with everyone, but with certain people, this has happened, right? Now, this effect or this exercise or this experiment which we did, in case when I said a lie, is known as placebo. Okay, I've used an effect which is known as placebo. This is also known as placebo effect. Okay, placebo effect. Okay, you can read about this onto the internet as well. I would strongly recommend you read about the concepts. Then I have blind experiments. Blind experiments is where, in this case, as I took an example, right? My wife administered me with a tablet. She knew the name of the tablet. She knew the composition of the tablet. So the experimenter in this case is my wife, and I am the experimentee. I am the person on which the experimentation is being done. I am not aware of the name of the tablet. Okay, but my wife is aware of the name of the tablet. In which case, this is known as a blind experiment, but the person on which the experiment is being done is not aware on what experiment is being done on him. Right? In this case, I am not aware that I am being given a Norflux. Okay, I am under the impression, okay, I am taking a Bukhar ka pill, right? So that's what is known as a blind experiment, where the researcher knows what exactly the placebo is. Okay, but he doesn't know what is the effect. Blind or double blind experiments are where even the researcher does not know what pill I'm administering, whether that is Norflux, whether that is a cetirizine tablet, I don't know. He simply provided with the tablet by someone, or randomly he has scorched in his drawer. He found some homeopathic medicine or some kind of an allopathy tablet. He simply took that tablet. He went to me. He came to me, and or maybe my wife looked into the drawer. She found just a random tablet. She is going to take that tablet, come to me, and say, "Okay, this is a tablet. Go ahead and eat it." So that is known as double-blind experiment. Both the participant as well as the researcher, they don't know what is happening here, right? These are terminologies which will sometime come in place when we do experimentations. Okay, we may do placebo from time to time. We may do in industry as well. We do, especially in healthcare. We do, even in business industries also we do. Okay, if you watch, let's say, movies, I can take an example of movies as well. I've watched a movie named as, let's say, Kung Fu Panda. In that movie, I watched that there is this guy, this Kung Fu Panda guy, whose father used to sell a very interesting or special soup, right, with some kind of secret ingredient. He used to tell all the customers there is a secret ingredient in the secret soup, which is a very, very interesting soup. It is available at a discounted price, and so on and so forth. So people used to buy, and they really used to praise that soup. End of the day, when that guy was and that panda was going for a fight, okay, his father told him that there is no secret ingredient. Okay, it is plain and simple noodle soup. People only need to believe what they want to believe. Okay, so this is known as a placebo. If that person was not aware what kind of ingredients are being put, that's a blind experiment. Sorry, that is a double blind experiment. And if he's aware what kind of elements are being put into the soup, that's known as a blind experiment. So as you can see, this is applicable at many places. It can be done on the business scenario as well. Sometimes we make changes in IT systems without informing the user. We simply tell them we have enhanced the performance of our website. Please go ahead and have a look. Maybe we have not done anything, right? We just want to observe the study if there is any psychological effect on the customers. Okay, so placebo is used in the market, but not always. Now we are going to start with one part of statistics, which is otherwise known as descriptive statistics. Okay, a descriptive statistics is a very important part. This forms the base, and this is where some concepts are going to be introduced. I would like you to carefully listen to me, at least for the next 12 to 13 minutes of time which we have left, and try to understand each and every point. If you have any doubts, please let me know, because if you have any doubts here, there will be a lot of problems later. First, terminology. Lot of terminologies are going to be introduced here. Okay, first terminology, otherwise known as a population. Okay, a population is simply a collection or a set of objects. All the set, the set of all objects for which I perform the experiment. Okay, example given, I would like to perform an experiment on if I found out a remedy or vaccination for this COVID-19 problem, and I would like to test it. So in this case, what will be my population? My population is all the people in the world. Everybody in the world is going to be my population. The population of the world is the population of this experiment. Why is that the case? Because I don't know who at what point in time is going to be attracted with this virus. So that's why the effect of this fix that I'm trying to find out, right? This vaccination that I'm going to find is applicable for any or all human beings. That's why all the living human beings in this planet is going to be my population. Okay, so that's the definition of a population. Okay, then is it really possible for me to test or to take into consideration all people in the world? The answer is no. I cannot do that. I'll always have to restrict myself with the representative set or representative subset, the representative subset of the population. Okay, this representative subset is otherwise known as a sample. Okay, a sample is where I have a representation of the population. sampling is very, very important. If I have not done sampling properly, if I have not taken the sample out of the population properly, then there can be huge problems on the implication. And that is the reason why, as you can understand, I need to perform sampling in a very, very good way. Right? I need to perform sampling in a very, very good way that gives the outcome of uh, a terminology known as sampling technique. Okay, how am I going to select a sample? So population is every person in the world. Who is going to be the sample? I have to clearly or specifically select few people. Maybe I have selected us four. Is that a right way to do a sample? The answer is no. The we four in this call or we five in this call are not a representation of the entire world, right? We don't represent all the genders or all the genders even in the world. So that's the reason why the sampling technique is wrong. But then how should we do sampling? So there are certain ways in which we do sampling. On a broad level, they can be divided into two parts. One is known as a probabilistic sampling technique. Okay. The other is known as non-probabilistic sampling technique. Okay. Non-probabilistic sampling technique is used 0.001% of the times. This is very, very rare. People don't use it because it is really of no use. But statistically or mathematically, there is a chance that you can do non-probabilistic sampling. Non-probabilistic sampling is when the items or artifacts part of the population may not have an equally likely chance to be selected in the sample. So you don't know what kind of probability or what kind of mathematics is going to use or what kind of technique is going to be used to select or to create a sample. And that's why it is known as non-probabilistic sampling technique. There are a few techniques which are non-probabilistic, but they are really not useful at all. Why? Because members are selected from the population in some non-random kind of a manner. It is not randomized. Selection of people from the random or from the population is absolutely non-random. I don't know how I'm going to make a selection. Okay, there are some way in which we do the non-probabilistic sampling technique. The reason why I mentioned the 0.001 is because people don't really like this kind of sampling. So I'll just get this out of my way. First of all, there are a few ways in which we do this non-probabilistic sampling. There are actually four ways. One, which I have already used right now. It is otherwise known as convenience sampling. I want to take a sample of all the users, which is going to represent the population of this earth. Okay, what did I do? I went to the participant list and I saw we are 5 people here. Let's make that sample. That is known as convenience. I don't want to get out of my laptop even. I don't want to stand up. I don't want to do anything. I don't even want to take a pen and paper. I've taken the most easy way to do a sampling, which is known as a convenient sampling. Whatever is convenient for me, I've taken a sample. I'll also take a sample inclusive of my daughter and my wife. Why? Because anyways, I'm in a lockdown. They are so easy for me to get and to be convinced because they are part of my family only. They're going to listen. So I can take them as a sample. I can take you as a sample. I can try to convince you, maybe bribe you as well and take you as a sample. So that's known as convenience sampling. This is where no mathematics is used. There is no logic. Why I selected a certain number of members in the sample. The second kind of thing is known as judgment sampling. Okay, judgment sampling is where I believe if I select Saransh for this testing, I am doing a very wonderful job. I don't know what is the basis of this, but I am supremely confident. I have the mathematical basis, I have no equation, but I am sure if I take only him as a sample to represent the entire world, I have done a beautiful job. This is known as judgment sampling. Basis my judgment, I am taking a sample. Okay, the researcher selects a sample based on judgment, usually, which is an extension of convenience sampling. Okay, I'm simply saving money. Then the third type known as quota sampling. Okay, I will only consider kids and aged people. Okay, this is known as quota sampling. Do I have any aged people in my house? Yes, I may have my elders in the house, right? So I will take the elders in my house, or all the elders who are there in my society, or all the elders who are there in my locality, and so on, right? So this is known as quota sampling. I'm creating a quota. Why am I creating a quota? There's some kind of convenience and judgment which is happening in background of this quota. Okay, I'm creating that quota based on my judgment. Why? COVID-19 has affected most of the people who are aged. People who have died are almost always people who are aged, who did not had good properties in their body to retain or to fight this virus, right? So that's why I have done a sample, and based on that judgment, I have done a sampling based on the quota sampling. And then it is also convenient for me. I don't have to go do much things, right? In my society, I know people, and then I can go to them and talk to the elders. I exactly know how many elders are there in our building as well, and I can take them. So this is known as quota sampling. There is an alternative, mathematical alternative to quota sampling and probabilistic sampling techniques. We're going to look into that, and that's exactly what we will use majority of the times while we do any analysis. So quota sampling is the anti or the antonym, okay, of one of the best techniques of probabilistic sampling. So probabilistic sampling has a technique. I may not have time to cover that today. I will try to do that in the next session we have, which is the best representation of the ulta version of quota sampling, or the mathematical version of quota sampling. Then the fourth one is called snowball sampling. Okay, this is a very interesting kind of a sampling. This is where I am trying to do a lot of hard work while doing sampling. I am using very, very difficult kind of methods. You see, this B, C, and D techniques are where my methods were very simple, very easy, very cost friendly, and the things which I was able to do very easily. But snowball sampling is where I would like to become the best statistician in the world. I would like to do the sampling in a way nobody has done in this world ever before. So I'm trying to do a special kind of non-probabilistic sampling method, where the desired characteristics that I'm looking for in the patients or the samples or the people who I'm going to take as part of this testing of the vaccination is going to be very rare. Okay, I'm going to take very, very rare kind of, let's say, characteristics, and very specific kind of, let's say, characteristics, and so on. In the imagination, so snowball sampling is also based out of the so-called foolish or biased imaginations I may have, that if I do a lot of research and take a lot of, let's say, heuristic kind of samples, then I should be able to do a lot of good things, which is not really the case, my friends. It hardly helps. Okay. So these are mainly the techniques where I have non-probabilistic sampling. Why? Because there is no mathematical formula behind it. Now, what happens when I do probabilistic sampling? I'll write down the names. I'll try to cover them as much as possible today. I don't think I'll have time, and that's why we will continue on the next class. The first kind of probabilistic sampling is known as random sampling. Okay, random sampling is when I don't want to do any quota, any judgment, any convenience, any snowball. I'm a very efficient statistician. I go out on the road every I am going to select randomly anybody. I'm going to go on in my area. In my area, there will be thousands and thousands of people. I'm going to select hundreds and hundreds of them as part of my sample. My sample is going to be really very big, but the selection will be completely random. I'm not going to do any judgment, nor convenience, nor quota, nor snowball. This is called random sampling. This is where every person in my area has an equal opportunity to get selected as part of the sample. This is very important to remember. Every object is equally likely to be selected. Okay, this is the main crux when it comes to random sampling. Okay, so that is the reason why majority of the times people go with random sampling, because this is till date one of the most convenient, one of the most easy to approach, as well as one of the most best ways to do it, because randomly you select people and you do a survey, randomly you select people and try to do their blood test and so on. The second kind of sampling is known as systematic sampling. Okay, systematic sampling is where I go out on the road and I say, I take one person or take one person from each 4 people. So I see 4 people on the road, I take one of them. For each and every 4 people I meet the first person, then the second person, the third, and then the fourth. I take at least one of them out of my sample. Then I again meet 4 more people, I take another one. So this is kind of a system. I can create my own system. There is no control. Nobody can tell me what is going to be my system. I can create my own system as I want. Basis the way I can create a system, I'm going to select a system, I'm going to follow that system and create a sample, which again is random but collected systematically. In this case, not every object is equally likely to be selected. Okay, because there is a system which is followed. I think we'll stop here because I don't think we have time now. So let me stop the sharing. We will close it here, friends. Maybe if you have any doubts, you can let me know on the chat group. Thank you so much for joining.